I'm Don Manzullo, the President and CEO of the Korea Economic Institute of America, and we welcome you here for our annual Korean American Day. Where is Chang? Is she here? There he is. Chang Kim. Give her a big round of applause. Chang put this all together, and thank you, Chang, for doing an excellent job on it, and also to the rest of our staff who are here who have worked really closely with Chang to bring this about. Let me start with a few housekeeping items. First of all, please start eating your salad. Pick up your fork, start eating your salad right now. Second, anybody wishing to tweet this event, please use hashtag KDAY, K-A-D-A-Y. Also, at the end of the program, please pick up, and this is really important, please pick up your 2-day museum pass at the check-in desk. One of the greatest museums in the world. One of the 2 places that I highly recommend here in the Museum of American History. And a voucher for your pass is inside the program on your plate. You must hand this voucher to one of our staff. In order to get the museum pass, you can only have 1 pass per person. We're privileged to have with us today among our distinguished 2018 honorees. I think there's, let's see, Ambassador Tom Hubbard. Tom, where are you? Here he is. And I don't know if Congressman Al Wynn has been able to make it, but also our good friend Ambassador Bob King, Everyman a King. It's a real joy to have these former ambassadors here because of the tremendous work that they have done, especially in the area of human rights in Korea. KEI's mission is simple, to promote dialogue and understanding between the United States and the Republic of Korea on all matters affecting the relationship. KEI serves as a bridge among the academic, business, diplomatic, policy, and civic communities of those interested in Korea. And we continue to promote this vision today. We come to tell the story of Korea's rich and unique contribution to the American experience. Ever since the first Korean immigrants landed on America's shores over 100 years ago, they have added enormously to the strength and vibrancy of the United States. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, there are over 1.7 million residents of Korean descent living in the United States, over half of them living in Annandale, Virginia. The Korean community in the United States is involved in all sectors of American experience, from academia to public service, to sports, to journalism. And today's focus, this year's focus, is on journalism. We're privileged today to have 3 honorees of Korean descent who are involved in exercising their First Amendment rights guaranteed to them under the U.S. Constitution to free speech and the free press. After a free flow of information we all know that a free flow of information is absolutely critical to any democracy, and we know how hard the United States and Korea have worked to keep up this free flow, and how both countries are continuing to develop more and more liberties in the area of free speech. Today's a very special day. Among others, we're privileged to have Gene Policinski. Gene is the president and CEO of the Museum Institute, which is the education and outreach partner of the Freedom Forum at this great museum. This institute houses the First Amendment Center, the Religious Freedom Center, and Museum ED, which is an online educational platform for teachers and students who cannot come to the museum in person. It's important to remember what's going on with the First Amendment. I was at a major state university about 6 months ago, and an editor had written an editorial saying the whole purpose of the First Amendment is to make sure that speech is pleasing to others. That's what she said. Totally did not understand that. Gene was one of the founding editors of USA Today back in 1982, which is now one of the most highly circulated newspapers in the United States. He joined the Freedom Forum in 1996, the foundation that is the primary funder of the museum and the Museum Institute. He presently oversees all the programs of the Museum Institute, advocates on behalf of First Amendment issues, and is a longtime proponent of diversity in journalism as an essential element of a free press. Thus, we're greatly honored that, Gene, that you took the time of your busy schedule to recognize Korean American journalists who are obviously a very important fabric in the American experience. Gene, why don't you come on up? And after Gene makes his opening remarks, we'll proceed to serve lunch. Then we'll see a video reading of the Korean American Day. Let's see, the steps over there. Okay. We'll see a video reading of the Korean American Day Congressional Resolution and give a brief background to our three honorees. After the video's over, we'll welcome the honorees to the stage for moderated conversation with KEI's own Jenna Gibson, who is our Director of Communications. Now, welcome to the podium, the President and CEO of this great museum institution, Gene Policinski.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you. Welcome to the distinguished guests, the honorees, the ambassadors who are here, and all of you. I can't tell you, in all honesty, how much of a delight it is to have this invitation to speak to you for just a moment on various levels. Obviously, on behalf of my colleagues here at the museum, at the Museum Institute, and our funding parent, the Freedom Forum, we welcome you to the museum and to the Knight Conference Center, which is where we are now. But on a very personal level, I have to say, looking at both the history of this organization, this lunch, and the incredible accomplishments of the honorees today, I'm reminded, and if you will permit me a personal moment, as a person whose family, we were talking a bit about it today, but whose family now stretches from China to Poland, from the Czech Republic to Ireland, and we're not sure, perhaps somewhere else down the line. I want to tell you what a deep appreciation I have for what people from various cultures, nations bring to the United States, and perhaps what we may offer to them by way of a, we've tried it this way, what do you think? It is an honor to have this organization, this group here today in our building, and obviously particularly a delight to see you honoring three extraordinary journalists who come from very different professions, parts of the profession, but who all, I think, are emblematic of the nature of journalism to bring us news that we need to know, news sometimes we'd rather not know, news that enriches our lives, that adds texture, that adds meaning from video to print to photography. These are extraordinary people that you're honoring today. The museum and I are honored to be in the presence of those three. They represent what I think our nation's founders had in mind, which was journalists and the role of journalism as providing all of us with information we can use to make better decisions in concert with our fellow citizens that improve the lives of us all. That, after all, is why we have the First Amendment, which we, by the way, modestly display on the front of the building, and that 75-foot stone tablet, should a government official drive by. But you know, the purpose of that was not simply to allow us to sort of make any noise we wanted. It wasn't even really simply to allow us to be creative, although it certainly has that role. It was to allow people of this nation, and we hope in the area of free expression in every nation, to talk to themselves, to jointly seek the best possible solution for the greatest number of people in the freest possible fashion. And that is really what we hope the First Amendment means around the world, not just in the United States. We would hope and think and know, actually, that in the Republic of Korea, you've had interesting times, shall we say, and there is a commitment to knowledge and giving citizens the tools by which they may assist those who we temporarily select to govern us, but to live up to the responsibility ultimately of us as citizens to govern ourselves. That is, to me, the power and majesty of freedom of expression, of the First Amendment, and of journalism. So again, I welcome you here. I know you'll have an opportunity to see our museum. I hope you'll spend some time in that building after you've worked here for a longer time. You can't say the M Museum, you just say museum. So it's the Smithsonian Museum, I'm sorry. But to see our museum and the museum, but to go there and to see what we, well, honestly, I hope you see the good and the bad, the places where journalism has thrived and the places where it has fallen short of its mission. So I invite you to critique us, to stay engaged through journalism, perhaps to find something of interest in the building as we move through our exhibits. We've just opened what is I think the 5th year of our exhibits on the American Civil Rights Movement opening today. So that we hope you can see that exhibit along with the other items we have. But again, thank you very much for selecting us as a place to honor journalism and journalists, particularly the 3 that you're honoring today, whose careers are just extraordinary. So thank you again, and please enjoy the museum. Thank you.
So, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Jenna Gibson. I'm the Director of Communications at KEI, and I'm really honored to be up here on the stage with these wonderful journalists who have had such a variety of experiences. And I invite you to look at their biographies, their full biographies in your booklet, but for the sake of time, I'd rather talk to them about their experiences and how they approach the field of journalism. So to start off, I want to have you guys, maybe we can start with Julie and go down, talk about maybe a current project that you're really excited about or something that you are looking forward to get the conversation started.
Well, I'm actually very excited to be working on 2 projects, and I have brilliant partners for both of them, and they happen to be here in the audience. Sojin Kim, who I'm working on. Sojin, you want to stand up? I'm working on a biography about my journalism mentor, K.W. Lee, and it's going to be an unconventional biography, but I'm very honored to be working with Sojin. And Eugene Yi, stand up, Eugene, who's my directing partner on our documentary film, Free Chol Lee. And Free Chol Lee, if I could talk about that, is a little-known story about a Korean immigrant man in the 1970s who was wrongly convicted of a Chinatown gang murder. He was sent to one of California's most violent prisons for a life sentence, and while in prison, he was attacked by a neo-Nazi inmate. He managed to kill the neo-Nazi inmate in self-defense, but that led to a second murder charge, and then he was put on death row. This could easily be one of those stories, just one of those tragic tales of somebody who fell through the cracks, an innocent man who was put to death or died in prison. But remarkably, Asian Americans of different ethnic backgrounds, of different generations, of different political persuasions even, united for an unprecedented social justice movement to free him from prison. And it was a social justice movement that succeeded after 6 years of struggle. And the story doesn't actually end there because we will talk about how even after Chol Lee was released from prison, he struggled, as many do as they enter society, many ex-cons, and that's a very topical issue, as you know now, as we talk about recidivism and reentry. So it's a story that I'm very passionate about because there was a journalist, K.W. Lee, who was the investigative reporter whose stories led to really forming this movement, because Asian Americans around the country read them and saw this injustice, and there was something about this young man's tale, his immigrant backstory, that resonated with them and really speaks to the power of journalism in leading to a social movement that fought the criminal justice system, a minority group that fought the criminal justice system and won. And so I think that's a very powerful story to talk about now in terms of power of journalism and speaking truth to power and challenging injustices where they are.
Well, I'm going to be quick because I don't really have a project that I'm working on because I'm a journalist that works for a network, and so it just depends on what is going on in the world. Unfortunately, or fortunately for my business, there's a lot going on in the world constantly. I just came off covering the mudslides in California this week, which was catastrophic, and that would be an understatement from what I saw. But prior to that, I was at the Golden Globes, just days before, just glamorous event, meeting Oprah, talking about the Me Too movement and Time's Up. So I'll connect it with your question, which is, if any project deserves some coverage, or topic, I should say, it's the Me Too Time's Up movement. I think that is a revolution that's taking place right now in our country, and hopefully it's going to catch on globally. I think it's high time that women are treated equally in every way, and it's high time that women feel the courage to speak up to any kind of injustice. And finally, this movement is allowing and giving women permission to not stay silent anymore. So for me as a journalist, these stories are amazing. These stories that women are courageous enough to come out and tell through the media. And so going to what you were saying, Julie, journalism is crucial in our society. It's crucial in terms of truth-telling and fact-finding and telling people stories. And in my 30 years as a journalist, I promise you, everyone has a story. I don't care if you are a janitor sweeping floors or if you are, the king or queen of England, but everyone has a story. And so our job is to get those stories out and make it matter and make an impact.
Well, the Pyeongchang Olympic is coming, and luckily I'll be covering Pyeongchang Olympic and Paralympics. I have covered 7 Olympics, and it will be my first Paralympics. So I've been doing stories leading to the Olympics last few months. So that's what I'm focusing and concentrating on right now.
Great. So one thread that I heard both in the videos, all of you, and then here on the stage as well, is talking about stories, the power of storytelling, the power of journalists to tell these stories. So for each of you, what does it mean to be a journalist? What does it mean to be a storyteller? How does that inform your work? Maybe I'll go the opposite way.
Well, I'll take it very simple way. I mean, photography is a means of confirming my existence, my life. That's how I feel I'm alive. Every time I click, and I cannot think of anything else but the moments, and I'm in there. That's how I feel I'm alive. I think it's might be more selfish reason to some, but I think that's where it should start. The journalism also should start from. It's all about my person to person, not for any purpose or for reasons, but I rather approach the people as who I am and as who they are. That's all it matters to me, and that's why I love photography. And photography gives me a chance to meet the people around the world. As you said, anyone has a story. If you ask your parents, your mom or your dad, they can write a book about their life stories. Of course, anyone in the world. But because of the timing of the history and the issues, we go to the different people and important people to cover, and that's how we do stories and we share with them, and we bring it to the table for the readers and people to judge for themselves for the situation and for the people in the situations.
Yeah, I mean, you have to love what you do as a journalist, or else you're not going to be very good and you're not going to last very long. Because at least in television journalism, people make the assumption that it's very glamorous and we're just a bunch of talking heads and celebrities, which is really not true. Some of them are, just FYI. Some of them are. But for the most part, we do what we do because we have a true commitment and dedication to trying to get that, again, the real stories out there. And now, in this day and age of so many different platforms, right? Back in the day when I was starting, it was just major networks and CNN was just coming up. But now you have multiple platforms, and therefore it makes it much more complicated. On one hand, it's great because there's so much information out there, so you can use many, many different resources to get your information. On the other hand, which is the big negative, is that the information is oftentimes wrong. So now we have this new term called fake news that someone in particular in the city likes to use quite often. But that has complicated matters for our work. So therefore, the responsibility of good storytelling and good journalism has really, we have to raise the bar here because there's so much cynicism and there's so much uncertainty about what you're reading and what you're hearing. Even things that are on videotape are being questioned as not real. I never thought there'd come a day where it's on tape, but it's being called fake news. And so it definitely has complicated storytelling quite a bit, but I think it's elevated a lot of us. And I really do think there's a renaissance going on in journalism. So therefore, you're seeing publications do well again. You're seeing subscription rates go up again. Movies like The Post are doing really well because it is a story about, the freedom of journalism and, our First Amendment rights. That movie could be made today and with the same themes going on. So pretty remarkable times we live in. And as being a journalist, it's fascinating, totally fascinating.
I found Chang's answer so interesting about with each click you feel like you're sort of proving you're still alive, and because I think for me, journalism personally, because I grew up a minority in a very white suburban community, didn't really see diverse images of myself. I think I always felt like I don't know if I felt fully human. And so it's a very personal thing for me, the storytelling, because in the early 90s, I was a college student. That's the time you come of age and maybe search for your ethnic identity and take pride in your ethnic identity, and you're more curious. And in the early 90s, there was a major event called the 1992 Los Angeles riots. And as you probably know, it was the first multi-ethnic riot in the United States and the worst riot in the United States. And Koreans were portrayed in the mainstream news as pretty much the enemy, the problem, the greedy store owners who come into inner cities and exploit African American neighborhoods, and they were the cause of the racial tensions. And Black Korean conflict was a big headline when I was growing up. And so I think at the very time where I thought you would want to take pride in your ethnic background or explore it more, I think I felt a lot of shame. And so meeting my journalism mentor, K.W. Lee, who started a publication called the Korea Times English Edition, because he introduced that concept to me, full human context, and how every community deserves to be known in our full human context. I think that gave me finally a tool to empower myself and say, this isn't right. The images that I see aren't truthful. They're not diverse. And I had the power to do something about it. So in a way, storytelling became very connected to me, proving that I'm fully human, and that other people who have been misrepresented or underrepresented in mainstream and popular media, we all deserve that full representation. And so that became a very important role that I felt like I could embrace.
So speaking of storytelling, I'm wondering if in your coverage, any of you have a story that really stuck with you, that you still think about that moment or that story. I might start with May, if you have any stories from your career that have stuck with you.
Do you have a couple of weeks?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really hard question to answer, just because, again, 30 years doing this. We were talking in the green room before. 9/11, of course, was one of the biggest. I was there in New York and saw the towers collapse and lost a friend who was killed. And so it impacted me in every way possible. And that was really the first time when I got emotional on the air. And every single major anchor did too. Dan Rather, Tom Brokaw, Peter Jennings, everyone. Because it was so difficult to not be emotional. And And that, I think that was a little bit of a turning point in journalism, at least television journalism, where for the first time, we were given permission and nobody criticized, these major anchors and journalists for getting emotional. Because, we're supposed to stay neutral and we're not supposed to, become part of the story. But in this case, it was far beyond anything that anybody could comprehend. So therefore, we showed that we were human. And that's what I think journalism should be also. We are human. We're not robotic. We shouldn't always think that, we can't express any emotion or show some opinion in some way when it comes to some human condition. So when it comes to empathy and compassion and all these things, I believe as a journalist, we should express that at times, especially at moments that are life-altering events like 9/11.
Chang, do you have any?
Yeah, I totally agree. You need people need a week or so. But I usually tell I cannot do 천일 야화, which means telling the story for 1,000 nights. But like Arabian Nights, I can do 100 nights at least to tell the story about what happened. But I was there at the September 11 too, and that was the moment of people vanishing in split second. And I took picture of the World Trade North Tower collapsing. It's a long story, but since you mentioned, I'll talk about some other story. One day, I was covering the war in Afghanistan, and I was in Kunduz province in northern Afghanistan, and we did a story about this refugee camp. It was a really cold winter, and they were living in this makeshift mud hut with just blanket covering the entrance, and there was an old lady about to die, and there was no help to coming. And there was a mother who gave birth to 15 days old baby girl. I was just holding her arm with just blanket covering the entrance in cold winter. So I took picture of her, and it ended up on the cover of a New York Times a Nation Challenge special section. And a few days after, we were worried about them, so we brought some waters and some wheats for them to cook, and it's small car, but we fit as much as we could fit, and stopped by there. And they recognized our car from far away, and like literally entire refugee camps came, run towards us with arms open, running towards us with a smile, and we didn't know what was going on. And we got up, and everyone was so glad to see us. And it turned out that after we visited their camp, the international help arrived to their camp, and with food and water and medicines. So they thought it was us that brought the food and help for them. But that might have been true. Maybe somebody saw it and decided to send supplies or help. But I don't know what exactly happened. But I was just so glad to see their smile and happiness, that just a basic relief they should have to begin with. But after suffering such a long time, they finally had their help. So that was great to see, and that was probably one of my best moments covering those people.
Yeah, it's really hard to choose. I hate choosing. Sometimes it's strange because sometimes it's the smaller stories that they stay with you. And so I remember I was a reporting trainee at the LA Times, and I was sent out for general assignment story to cover an event at a college campus sponsored by a campus women's organization, and it was called like the Clothesline Project, which was a traveling exhibition of T-shirts that were decorated by domestic violence victims, and so they could express words or images, just sort of distilling their feelings. And the exhibit came to a Cal State campus, and I went there to cover it, but the auditorium where the event was supposed to take place was too loud because there were a lot of students there, and there was like a band that was playing, and so the organizer didn't realize there was going to be a band in the same auditorium, and so the speaker, she was like, I'm not going to compete with this band, and so she walked out. She's like, I'm leaving. And so it looked like, okay, there's nothing to report here. And I remember calling my editor and saying, okay, this is what happened. They canceled it. And he's like, okay, just come on back to the office. But for some reason I stayed, I lingered, because the organizer, this young college student, she was just so distraught. And I just stayed with her, and we walked around campus, and as part of the project, they had set up tables where they would allow women to take T-shirts and start, drawing or painting messages and pictures. And lo and behold, just one by one, like, these different women came to the table, and they were domestic violence victims, and they just started talking about their own personal stories, and to these young college students, and the college students just really listened and just were silent, and it was just really emotional, because they were sharing such personal tales of abuse by boyfriends or husbands. And I guess it was one of those moments as a young journalist where I felt like there are going to be like these moments that you have the privilege of bearing witness to, and they're not always like big moments, big events, but there are smaller moments where members of humanity are connecting with each other in a really profound, beautiful way. And so I remember, I took notes, and I did interviews, and I tried to describe what I had witnessed, and went back to the newsroom and told my editor. Of course, he's like, well, we can't run the story because the event didn't happen. And I was like, but I think there's a different story here, and can I pitch it, for a different section that ran sort of more thoughtful, column-like pieces in the paper. And I was able to get that story into the paper. And like I said, it was a very small story, but for some reason to this day, I still think about it, and it taught me, one, sometimes stick around that extra minute. Even if you think, oh, there's no story here. Maybe it's not the cookie cutter story that we journalists are supposed to tell. There might be a far different story to tell, and don't be afraid of listening for that. And the other is to, even if your editor says, no, I don't think there's a story here, sort of be willing to fight for your subject, because if you really believe that something important happening, you want to share it with the public at large, then fight for it, and stand up for it, and you have a good chance of actually getting your story published.
And stories happen by accident sometimes. You go out on something, and then all of a sudden you'll meet somebody on the side, and they'll have a completely different angle. I'm going to lighten it up a little bit with another story. Because people love animal stories. So when I was covering the Northern California fires up in wine country a couple months back, we were going through the rubble, and these areas were decimated. And I stumbled upon this area that was completely burned out. It literally, things were not just burned, they were cremated. It looked like things had been cremated. Everything was gone, and then all of a sudden to my right, I hear this noise, and it's clucking. And I turn, and there is a chicken coop completely intact, and the fire had literally just burned around it when everything else was gone, and there were 5 chickens just clucking away inside the chicken coop. And I was like, this is a miracle, And so then a guy is there helping to clean up, and I said, what happened? He's like, don't know, but you should go to the farm down the street, because they got a story to tell. So I go find this young farmer couple cleaning up after the fire had swept through their entire farm. 8 out of 12 structures had been completely destroyed. They left with the clothes on their backs and their dog. That's it. That's all they could go, because the fire swept through so fast. They had to leave their cows, their sheep, their 300 chickens, goats, everything behind, horses. And they're like, they're gonna go. Everything's gonna be dead. They go back the next day. The cows are happily, sitting in this area. The horses, same thing. 2 little goats are in this area where it was fenced in. Things had collapsed. They're alive. Then they go to their big chicken coop, and it's enclosed. They had put all the chickens in thinking, well, we're going to probably have roasted chicken inside. They open up the doors and all the chickens come out, not even one singed feather. This fire had literally gone under the chicken coop. Everything around it was burned out. Everything was black. How did they survive? Chickens peck, right? So all day long, they peck around their coop. They had pecked everything away. They created their own fire ring. Not one single one was lost. So I did this story because I went, this is incredible in a really weird way. It was a sign of hope, and believe it or not, viewers loved it. Of course they loved it. It was about animals, but it was just such a weird, wacky story that I just stumbled on, in the midst of horrific destruction. So yeah, it happens. You just don't know where the story's going to come from sometimes.
So I have a question for Chang specifically. Since you are a photojournalist, I know all journalists have this issue, but particularly when you have this machine in front of you and you're trying to have an intimate moment with someone, especially a lot of times at a difficult part of their lives, how do you create a space where people are comfortable with you and with your camera? Or how do you get people comfortable telling those stories when you're there?
Well, my problem is myself. I'm big. Camera, it doesn't matter. It's very small. But the best, I think some people are very friendly, hugging, and make other people comfortable. But I'm not really articulate, to be honest, and I'm very quiet in a way. So I just introduce myself, and if that's bad situation, I'm sorry to meet you in this difficult situation. But would like to share your story. That's pretty much all I do, and I just spend time and just wait there, and just been hanging out there and just wait for the moments or for them to do whatever they work continue to do, and just wait for the moment to happen. Sometimes it's first picture, it's sometimes my last picture, whatever it takes. Just spend time with them and see what's going on. There's nothing I can do. I'm not trying to make them comfortable or anything. Just be myself and let them be themselves.
And then Julie, I'm really curious, because you've worked for a daily, you've worked for a magazine, and now working on a documentary. So are there any things that tie those very different projects together, and then any differences that you found as you were moving through your career?
Yeah, actually I was surprised that there is a lot of commonality. Obviously the reporting, digging for the truth, looking for balance and accuracy, and approaching it with integrity and humility, I think are all consistent across all of that. I think, the differences were like pace. A daily, obviously, it's like you're only as good as your last story, and you're just constantly hustling it. And I mean, I worked at a mid-sized newspaper in Connecticut, and I had to cover two small towns. One was a town of 16,000, one was a town of 32,000, and they wanted 2 stories every day, about their small town where not much happened. So yeah, you're just like constantly just feeling that time pressure. But then I moved to a monthly magazine at Journal, and it was like, wow, this is so slow. Sometimes there were days I felt like I think I could actually write like most of the stories in an issue, because if I kept the pace of a daily, if I really needed to, if I became desperate. And then you get sort of used to that pace, and then you're like a little spoiled. And then with a documentary film, I've learned that it's a very long-term project. My directing partner's smiling, and I didn't realize that before I got into it. And I watch a lot of documentary films, and I read and watch interviews with documentary filmmakers, and some of them you hear about 6 years, 10 years for them to complete a project, and you're like, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? So I hope it won't take that long, maybe like 4 years. But yeah, it's that time, and then also with documentary filmmaking, it's the visual element, right? That you need to visually tell the story. It's not enough to have amazing quotes, but you need to capture the person saying that on camera effectively, and the sound's good, the lighting's good. And so that's been a real exercise in patience for me, and all the production setup and things like that. So I definitely have a deeper appreciation for documentary filmmakers now that I'm working on one. But yeah, a lot. But the storytelling's the same. The principles that sort of undergird your approach to your story, to me, are consistent. Yeah.
May I have a somewhat similar question, because even though you've been in the television industry, you've been based in a lot of different places, and both domestic and abroad, traveling to cover stories all over the world. So how have you seen if there's any common threads through the different places that you've worked, or anything that surprised you when you went somewhere new and it was quite different?
Let's see. I mean, the common thread is information. Everybody wants to be well informed wherever you live and whatever you do. So that's journalism has always, that's why we have our role wherever we go. In my industry, television journalism certainly has changed so dramatically since I started. So it's almost unrecognizable from when I started 30 years ago to what it is now. And so that, even just technologically, I started in the days when we were shooting on 3/4-inch tape. So we had a big pack and a camera and a tripod, and I was a one-man band when I first started. And I don't even weigh 100 pounds, so I think I was carrying probably 60 pounds of equipment trying to get the story done. And so the evolution of what's happened in our industry is so dramatic, and now everything's digital. I can edit from anywhere. I can track my voice, and my editor is somewhere else, and he puts the story together, and then we send it, via the internet. And so that's just completely different in the way we can report now. Again, I was saying earlier that obviously has made it a little bit more difficult, because you don't know where the information is coming from. You don't know who's really filing. Now with Twitter and Instagram and all these things, people are just posting whatever they feel like without any corroboration. So that's the challenge for us. Having lived and worked in different parts of the world, certainly I've run into different restrictions as a journalist. I was censored a couple of times in Singapore for different stories, and because they obviously have some restrictions there. I now work for CCTV, which is Chinese television. I work for the US entity, so we have a lot more freedom, and we follow a different set of rules for the most part. But our mothership is still Beijing. And so therefore, there have been a couple of things that have happened that I've tried to report on, where they raised their eyebrows, or they actually stepped in and said, I think you need to change this wording a little bit. But here's the truth, folks. Censorship happens everywhere. Happens here. It's just veiled because we live in a democracy and we do have freedom of the press. However, it does happen everywhere. And so, again, as journalists, we do face that challenge no matter where we go, what we cover. It's just some things are much more overt than others. So that is something that I've seen across the board everywhere I've worked, which I think some people are surprised by. Yeah.
So I do want to get into this because part of what's so great about the fact that this year's theme is media and journalism is that in a way that at least I have not seen, the media and the journalists themselves are in the spotlight. Usually everyone's behind the camera or behind the notebook, but it's kind of become the story in a lot of ways. So I'm curious, not necessarily your experiences, but just how do you deal with that in your work? And how are you trying to overcome some of those new spotlights being put on you?
Lots of alcohol. Just kidding.
And if any of you have any thoughts, please. Yeah.
Well, I probably say generally not I didn't have that much experience of being yelled at. Like I was at a few demonstrations here and there, but I'm very quiet way approaching things. So I didn't have any confrontation or anything. But I think it's a great time, and it's really. You mentioned the renaissance of media now. I totally agree with it, because about fake news, the importance of the truthfulness and true journalism is highlighted, and people are being more aware of that, more importance of the true journalism, and that I think that's a great thing. And the young generation, young journalists or aspiring journalists here, will be much more trained and aware of what they need to do because of this fake news. And the fake news has been, or like the news, propaganda newspapers has been everywhere since the history of journalism. And now most of the countries only have one-sided propaganda journalism. But because of this fake journalism and social media and opportunities for everyone to have a tool, whether it's they can use for fake journalism or true journalism, it's up to them. But more people are aware that they can use it and have the power of journalism with their hand. Instead of taking selfie pictures like this, turn the camera around, and you can document the life around you and share with them. And people will know what's truth and what's fake. They have, let's not underestimate our readers and people in the world with, they will know when it's fake news. They have a lot of young people. My son is 14. He has been raising with all these fake, whether it's fake news or not, on the Instagram, Facebook. He knows what's fake news and what's not. And at the end, the truthness and true journalism will prevail, and that's what we're striving for. So we will continue to survive and keep shine as long as we still try it.
Chang, I hope you're right, and I really do agree that that maybe the younger generation now, because they've been exposed to this, idea of irresponsible journalism, fake news, and misinformation, that they are becoming much more aware that this exists, and so therefore they're going to try to investigate further, try to get the right information rather than just taking things at face value. When we were growing up, we just whatever the headline was, that was fact. That was true. Now we can't do that anymore. Sad to say, but I hope this next generation is much more aware, becomes much more responsible to getting it right. Because, man, we're getting it wrong a lot these days, for sure.
I do worry about that, though, because, I have a 14-year-old daughter, and I remember during the presidential election coverage before Trump won, they'd have all these pundits on TV being interviewed, and I remember I had CNN on, and my daughter asked me, like, who is she? Is she pro-Clinton or pro-Trump? And it was Dana Bash, the journalist, and I was like, oh my God, you think she's, and she thought that was the natural setup for news these days,
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of talking heads.
And I was like, oh my God, I need to do a better job of educating my own children about distinguishing between the commentary and what is actually the actual news and the facts.
I think it's great. I think it's also a process. It's about in progress, like democratic process and progress around the world. In Korea, the democratic the demonstration with the candle changed the government, and people are much more aware of what they can do and what's right and what's wrong. And at the end, the time has passed. We are more aware of the fake news, and we are more aware of the importance of the right and truthful newspapers.
Not everyone.
Not everyone, of course, but I think it will get better and better, and I think it's helping.
Well, when
the
you
society.
have a major network still, spewing out fake news and like facts that aren't facts, and then passing that off as real news, we have a problem. And a lot of people are watching.
Yes.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are aware of it, and I hope we can make it better. Everyone.
Yeah, hopefully.
I I feel like the minorities in America, I think we're sort of used to like not having the full truth known about our communities in a way. So we're sort of, it's sort of familiar.
It's like, welcome to our world.
Yeah. But it's a reminder that we need to be the truth seekers and the truth tellers, and sometimes we need to do that on our own terms, and we need to start our own presses, and we need to be more enterprising in that way if we feel like it's not happening on its own. And I think this is a very empowering time where we realize we can't just remain idle and let things happen, because then we'll see the country go in a very dangerous direction.
Well, what is crazy to see now, and you're seeing much more of this in mainstream media, is anchors, reporters actually really pushing back on air. Right, we never used to do that, right? We weren't allowed to do that, and now they are just saying, no, he's lying. This is not. So I don't know if that's good or bad. I honestly, I can't decide, because before I was saying when I was covering 9/11, it was the first time we were showing emotion, it was okay. It was different because that was a human story, but in this case, we're talking about politics and social norms and all that. Is it okay? I'm not sure. I don't know.
I know what
Do
you
you know
mean.
what I'm saying?
I always question that too. And
Because me personally, when I'm home watching this and getting tweets, because I have to, I'm screaming. I'm like, what? But I can't. I'm not going to do that on the air.
No.
But you are starting to see journalists starting to really push back.
I worry that we're crossing the line, though, because there's one thing to sort of correct the person you're interviewing and saying, no, that's not true, these are the facts. But then there's like a tone almost, or like a gotcha kind of tone that I don't think is healthy. And I think that's what's led to a lot of distrust by people who don't necessarily believe it. We're not even believing the same facts anymore.
Yeah.
So I don't sort of like that cavalier kind of gotcha, I think,
the
attitude.
Cavaliers, exactly. Yeah.
So unfortunately, I know we could literally talk about this all day. I do want to ask you, though, because we're running towards the end of our time, perhaps the most important question, since we're all here for Korean American Day, for all of you, what does it mean to you to be Korean American, and what does it mean to you to be a Korean American in the media industry?
Well, probably should be the last person. Well, I'll be honest with you. I talked to the interview during the interview, but I'm probably the last person who contributed to my community. I've been just busy working and haven't thought about much about Korean community relationships, Korean American relationship. But when they called me and invited me for this event, I hesitated a little bit because I haven't done much for Korean American community. But thought maybe this is a wake-up call for me to be more aware about my Korean American community and help them and serve them and be part of it. And one of the reasons I just may mention that it's important to be here for aspiring journalists and young journalists that they can also be working at the major newspaper in America, and hope that even it's very small thing, but it can be reason why I'm here today. But while I'm working, I was always confident. Partially because I was Korean American and I'm Korean to the bone, and being Korean itself really, in a way, helped me to be very confident. I have a country that I belong to, that I love and I'm from, and being Korean American here for last 30 years I lived here. I was never ashamed of my background and my Korean background, and that gave me. I was always proud that I was Korean American, and that itself, being Korean American, helped me throughout my entire career and entire time living in America.
Well, I wish I could say the same thing, Chang, but I grew up in Ohio, as I said in that video, and it was very difficult. Being the only Asian and girl, and very shy. And so I actually didn't want to be Korean, right?
By the way, I came to America when I was 18 after 1 year in the college, so I was more.
Right, so you already had gone through the childhood angst, right? So, So unfortunately for me, it was a different experience because growing up in that environment was not conducive to feeling very confident about who I was. So, I remember wanting to change my name to Mary. I desperately wanted blonde hair, blue eyes, the typical reaction that a minority kid in a very Caucasian environment would have. And so for a while, I didn't want to embrace being Korean American. And as I got older, I realized that it was such a benefit. And then, of course, you realize the sacrifice that your parents make for you to be here. And they made a lot of sacrifices. And I never would have had the opportunities I would have if we had stayed in Korea, for sure. I was born in the States, but then we moved back to Korea for a few years. So when that hit me and I started realizing the importance of my true identity as a Korean and an American, that combination was so powerful to me that I had to live up to that. It's a responsibility, right? You have to live up to who you are, where you came from, and what that means, and then how you can share that with the rest of the world. I have a brilliant platform as a journalist to do so and to inject those experiences into stories and then also be able to empathize with people that I interview. So that connection makes storytelling so much better because there's something deeper. So for me, I grew up not having any role models in my business. There were no Asians, definitely no Asian women. The only person was Connie Chang. So I got called Connie Chang all the time when I was a reporter. And so that is highly important, to have role models. Kids want to see other people that look like them. If we don't see that, then we don't get the inspiration. We don't know that it's possible. And so for us, it's great that we're here to represent this industry and to show that, look, it's possible, and you can do it too. So just have the motivation and be inspired in any way you can, and be proud of who you are, who you really are.
I told you earlier, like May, I was sort of, I think, somewhat ashamed or not really embracing of my Korean American identity as well, and it didn't really happen until years later. And as I said, I think working at Korean Journal, being able to tell so many diverse stories about Korean America really helped me embrace my identity. So it had a very personal impact on me. And I think I'm really lucky that the first professional journalist I ever met happened to be of Korean descent. And how powerful that and life-changing it was to meet someone like that at age 18. And so, I think now I feel like there's still a responsibility to my Korean American identity to keep telling the stories. I don't think it's over. We are seeing greater diversity in mainstream news and popular media. Believe me, I am shocked that people are embracing K-pop and K-dramas, and that the dominant image when you think of Koreans is not the greedy store owner. So that's sort of like amazing to me that happened, because there was a time in my younger years where I thought that would be the image forever in America of Koreans. And so, but we're not, I don't think we're done, and that's why the project I'm working on with Eugene, the documentary film, means so much to me. And I'll connect it to the film because our subject, Chol Lee, he was actually just a street kid, a street thug, really. No prospects in life, tough, impoverished childhood, came here at age 12, raised by a single mom who he didn't really get along with, so ran away a lot. He said he never had a counselor or any kind of a bilingual counselor, a role model, anyone who was Korean American that he could relate to and who just, could sort of be a role model for him, whether it was a doctor, lawyer. And he said, gosh, maybe had he seen that and he seen what was possible, maybe he would have had greater dreams for himself. And so I think, I don't want to turn this into a plug, but I would say if you really believe in us telling our stories, telling our own stories, and through our lenses, then I would say support projects that you think do that, and don't Don't think, oh, other people, that's for other people to do. You know, really sort of empower yourself and say, if that's what you want to see and you don't feel like you're seeing it, then support the project that you think, you know, resonate with you and line up with your principles as well.
Thank you all very much, and thank you to our honorees. Very good conversation.
Okay, my name is Mark Tokola. I'm the Vice President of KEI. It's my privilege to announce the names of our honorees. So I'll do it in order, and we'll present you with your awards. First, Julie Ha. Next, Chang Lee. And next, Mei Lee. Okay, this concludes the event. It remains only for me to thank you all for coming and to wish you a happy and prosperous 2018. Thank you.